Three Viennese psychiatrists, three different answers to the same question. What fundamentally drives the human being? Sigmund Freud, the first to ask the question with full rigor, answered, pleasure. The pleasure principle. Beneath all our complex strivings, culture, religion, art, ambition, runs the deep current of the libido-seeking discharge. We are, at bottom, organisms managing the tension of unmet desire. Civilization is the partial sublimation of pleasure-seeking into forms society can tolerate. Alfred Adler, breaking with Freud, answered, power. The will to power. What humans most fundamentally want is to overcome inferiority, to achieve significance, to rise. The neurotic is one whose striving for superiority has gone wrong. Behavior is best understood as a compensation for felt inadequacy. Viktor Frankl, the youngest of the three, broke with both. He had read Freud as a young man, even corresponded with him. He had studied with Adler. He worked alongside them in the same intellectual climate of interwar Vienna. And then, in the death camps, he saw something that contradicted both of his predecessors. In the camps, all pleasures had been stripped away. There was no possibility of libidinal satisfaction. There was no possibility of achieving power. The men who survived psychologically were not the ones with the strongest drives for pleasure or the strongest will to dominate. The men who survived were the ones who retained, against every external pressure, a reason to live. A reason that pointed beyond themselves. A meaning. Frankl named this the will to meaning. Beneath the pleasure principle, beneath the will to power, there ran a deeper current. The human drive to find a meaning in one's existence, a purpose larger than oneself, an answer to the question, why am I here? When that drive was thwarted, no amount of pleasure or power could fill the gap. When that drive was active, even the absence of pleasure and power could be born. This was not theory. It was clinical observation, repeated through the rest of his career. The patients who came to him in the 1950s and 60s, in a Vienna newly prosperous, were no longer suffering from sexual repression as Freud had described, or from inferiority complexes as Adler had described. They were suffering from what Frankl called the existential vacuum, a sense of inner emptiness despite outward success. They had pleasure. They had achievement. They had nothing to live for. Freud had described one form of pathology, accurately, for one historical moment. Adler had described another, for another moment. Frankl believed he was describing the dominant pathology of his own era, and ours. The patient of the late 20th and 21st centuries is not, primarily, sexually frustrated. He is not, primarily, status frustrated. He is meaning frustrated. He has everything he was told would make him happy and feels nothing inside. The data have largely confirmed Frankl's view. Cross-cultural studies of life satisfaction find that meaning predicts well-being more strongly than pleasure. Patients in psychotherapy today most often present with the same symptoms Frankl was treating in the 1960s. Vague depression, anhedonia, a sense that nothing matters, success that fails to satisfy. Pure pleasure pursuit reliably produces what the addiction researchers call the hedonic treadmill. Each new acquisition normalizes, and the next is needed for the same satisfaction. Pure power pursuit produces what Frankl called the success neurosis, climbing without arriving. The will to meaning, by contrast, does not run on diminishing returns. A meaningful task is meaningful each time it is engaged. A person worth loving does not become normalized into background. A truth worth serving does not become boring with familiarity. Freud explained part of the human. Adler explained part. Frankl, in conversation with both, named what remains when pleasure and power are stripped away. He did not say pleasure and power were illusions. He said, beneath them runs a deeper river. Find that, and the rest can be born. Lose that, and no amount of the other will fill what is empty.